My name is Clare Lewins, and I'm director of the film The Wonderful Stories from the Space Station.
Throughout all history, humankind has had only one place to call home: our planet Earth. This year, men and women from 16 countries will actually set sail on an uncharted sea of limitless mystery and unlimited potential.
What the space station provides is our chance to become a spacefaring civilization.
You know, you think, oh, that guy's an astronaut, he must have been the smartest kid in the class. That was not me.
Как и все мальчишки, мы смотрели на небо, мы читали книги, в том числе о космических путешествиях.
I applied to be an astronaut for a course of 10 years before I was selected.
Peggy Whitson, rocketing towards the International Space Station.
How does it feel to be on your own?
There's billions of people on the planet, and there's only 6 of us right now that are not.
It was tough to be separated from the family.
Hanging around on the edge of the world.
Everybody wanted to know about the risk.
Finally, no one.
You're trusting engineers who designed and built that spacecraft. Everything's got to work if you're going to survive.
How's it going? Well, Frank, we're not having a very good day down here on Earth.
Will you help me?
It's difficult to describe how it feels to be the only American off the planet at a time such as this.
It's my planet. I want to protect it. You don't feel like the sentinels that are guarding the Earth.
Seeing the planet without borders, you see, we're all part of the same team, Team Earth.
If we're going to go to the moon, if we're going to go to Mars, the only way to do that is to do it together.
As the rocket goes higher up into the sky, there's this burst of light. It's amazing to think that that pinpoint of light is someone that you love.
This is 19, still love you. Yes, I have you loud and clear. Everything's good on our side. Congratulations.
That is a trailer from the documentary The Wonderful Stories from the Space Station. And this is Factual America. We're brought to you by Alamo Pictures, an Austin and London-based production company making documentaries about America for international audiences. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Welcome to the 3rd season of Factual America. If you don't know the drill already, each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. This week we're in for a real treat as we hear about what it's like to live and work hurling through space 250 miles above the Earth's surface. Joining us to discuss her film about the International Space Station is Clare Lewins, acclaimed director of The Wonderful Stories from the Space Station. Clare, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Things are very good with me, and thank you and your audience for showing an interest in our film.
Well, it's a pleasure. The film is The Wonderful Stories from the Space Station, released earlier this month, September 2021. Can be found on all digital platforms. Clare, I mean, give our audience a little taste of what is The Wonderful all about? Maybe a little synopsis.
Well, that's quite a hard question. Well, basically, if I just take you back a little bit, the idea of making a film about the space station, George Tignall, the producer of the film, she said, "Why, let's meet up for lunch. You know, I've had this idea, or an idea brought to me," and she said, "I won't tell you what it's about till we have lunch." And then when she told me, I thought, "Oh no, this isn't for me because I'm not good with science or engineering." And but then when I started looking into it, I realized that it's really fascinating about all the human connections, how many people it takes to get someone into space. And so the film really became about man's humanity all played out against this vast backdrop of the universe.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, this, I mean, a lot of things struck me about this film, you know, it's this idea of this. First of all, I would be remiss in saying that if not mentioning that this is the 58th anniversary of John F. Kennedy's UN address, where he basically proposed the original idea of cooperation between countries, in that case the U.S. and Soviet Union, to cooperate on space exploration. So that was quite revealing, I found.
Yes, I hadn't actually realised that. When I was looking at the people to interview, I wanted to interview George Abbey because he is such, you know, there was a book written about him called The Astronaut Maker. He's been across so much space exploration. And when I was talking to him, he actually said, you know, with JFK, it was always his plan to go together into space with the Russians. And he'd written a letter to Congress. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So that was kind of how I sort of started the film, really.
So the other thing is that strikes me, Claire, is that this international cooperation has outlived presidents, regimes, current events, 9/11. We've had Washington and the Kremlin at odds. Yet this just carries on and has been for several decades now. Is that right?
Well, I think one of the things that struck me was the actual amazing level of international collaboration. Obviously, maybe at a higher level you get issues, but when someone like Ginger Kerrick says, when she was working in Russia, you know, in Kazakhstan, says that, you know, if somebody hadn't told her about the space race, she wouldn't have known about it. Because if you think about it, all of the cosmonauts, astronauts, they rely on each other. I mean, if they're in space and there's arguments and things, that, you know, your life depends on your colleagues. So the actual collaboration is certainly very strong.
And I mean, I hadn't thought of this, but you know, we don't see any signs of strife or falling out at the space station. I mean, when in doing your interviews, it seems like what we see is what we get. Is that right? I mean, in terms of it's amazing this level of collaboration, both on the individual level and the international level.
I think there must be tensions, of course. I mean, if you put humans into space or put humans into a lift or put humans in a cave, there's going to be personalities and tensions arise. Nothing to do with the international side of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I would be awful in space. I would just, it wouldn't suit me at all. You know, I'd have to be sort of knocked out probably. Because, but what I want to talk to Samantha Cristoforetti about what makes a good astronaut, and it's not to be extreme, really. You obviously have to have all the skills and be intelligent and everything else, but in personality terms, you can't be too much of anything. You can't be too introverted. You can't be too extrovert. You just kind of keep calm. So they're trained so well but I'm sure there would be, you know, if somebody's taking your toothpaste, you're going to still feel annoyed.
Exactly. Or your whatever your packet of food that you get to eat, or your favorite lunch that had been prepared, or whatever. I think. I mean, the other thing that struck me as I was talking to some people about this after I'd seen the film is that it seems like this is unfortunately no longer newsworthy. I mean, in the sense that we have, you know, the space station flies over our head every 90 minutes or so. We can see it with the naked eye. I now realize I probably have seen it. It wasn't a UFO. You know, but we carry on as usual. It's not. And back to your point about the astronauts. I mean, shouldn't these people they should be heroes? They should be household names. But we don't. For most of us, we don't know who they are.
No, that's true. I mean, even when I first started approaching the film, I hadn't really given, I mean, this is a terrible thing to say, but I hadn't really given it much thought. You know, I know about Apollo 11, Apollo 13, and Gagarin, but I hadn't really, and it's the fact that when I found out that there were, while all, you know, 7.5 billion of us are going about our everyday lives, there's 6 people off the planet. I just thought that was just extraordinary. So that's what really hooked me into it, to think, well, that is quite an unusual thing to be going on. And the fact, as you say, that we've taken it sort of in a way for granted, it's become part of our everyday. They wouldn't want to see themselves as heroes. They take their role extremely seriously, space exploration and sort of using the space station really as a revolving laboratory, but trying to find out if humans can go further. That's what seems to be the key of it.
I mean, as you've pointed out, you've mentioned a few things they have in common. What are some of the in interviewing them and getting to know them? I mean, what did you discover that you didn't know before in terms of sharing common traits? I guess personalities, or maybe they're very unique. Maybe there's quite a diversity of personalities. I imagine they're just like the rest of us in that way.
Well, what I thought I'd find was that they were much cleverer than us. Sorry, I say about myself, you may be super clever. Certainly braver than me. And that is the case. They are very brainy. Yeah. But what I hadn't thought about or actually occurred to me was they're incredibly persistent people, that people just keep trying. Like Peggy, I think Peggy Whitson got knocked back 10 times by NASA, and she just was that farmer's stubborn, as she calls it, right, kept going. And it's this sort of resilience and determination to keep going that I kind of found quite moving, really.
Yeah, I think that was a commonality, at least the people most of the people that feature, most of the astronauts and cosmonauts that feature in this film, is that they did try many years, some of them. I think 10 years feels like almost the average in terms of trying to knock on doors and keep applying and keep persistently pursuing this. And I like what is is it Scott Kelly? Is that who?
Scott Kelly.
Yeah, who. I mean, his story is very interesting too, where he was in terms of almost dropping out of college, basically, and he and his twin brother. I mean, that is another story of sort of resilience and stick-to-itiveness, if you will.
Yes, I mean, Scott Kelly is the first to admit that he was completely distracted at school. He's staring out the window, and one day he'd be sort of stare out the window and he'd think, oh, I go home on my skateboard, and then it was a bike, and then it was a car, and then it was a plane, and then it was a rocket. He was constantly imagining speed and doing different things.
Yeah, and I think, I guess the other thing is that what struck me, another thing is that, I mean, if they're of a certain age, whereas you've already mentioned the Apollo missions, but they all seem to have been inspired by Apollo or Soyuz in the case of the Russians. And the other thing that struck me is they all seem to have grown up, many of them at least, where they could see the stars. They all talk about being able to rural Iowa or in Alpine Italy or West Sussex, if you will, and being able to see the night sky, which was something that was really impressed them growing up.
I think so. The one exception to that, of course, is Koichi Wakata, who really didn't have any Japanese role models in the sense of space exploration follow. So, I mean, he was just brilliant, the way he just sort of right, I'm going up into space, But the others, it's true. Peggy, in a way, a bit like, I always think of her as like the Ruby Slippers, the Wizard of Oz. She's in the middle of this rural community, just staring up at the sky, and just thinks, well, I'm going to go up there. And the same with Samantha, looking at the night sky, which I always find extraordinary, because I love looking at the night sky, but it has never occurred to me once in my life to leave the planet. I mean, that's a real different mindset, to have the courage to do that.
I mean, I just wondered too, do we think maybe light pollution's making us less interested in space? I mean, you have some amazing footage and imagery, but we no longer look to the stars. And light pollution, I mean, even the lights from our mobile phones and devices and things.
Well, I don't think it makes us less interested in space. If you look at, SpaceX and what's going on now, people are still, it's a fundamental part of humans' DNA, I think, to want to explore, to want to push the boundaries. If you think of the Vikings looking at the night skies when they're going along in their ships and they're navigating by the stars, or the Aborigines, it's just, and you go inside caves and you find drawings of sort of planets and constellations. I think it's something that's fundamental to us. I don't think the light pollution is going to stop that.
Okay. Well, hope not. And I think it's again one of these films I think that could, besides Apollo and then subsequent missions in the space station. I mean, I think this is something that your film is as well could inspire future generations to carry on and do like these astronauts and cosmonauts. I think we're going to give our listeners an early break, and then we'll be right back with Clare Lewins, director of The Wonderful Stories from the Space Station. Released earlier this month, September 2021, on digital platforms.
You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America.
Welcome back to Factual America. I'm with acclaimed director Clare Lewins, who's just released The Wonderful Stories from the Space Station, released this month, September 2021, on digital platforms. I think it's on limited theatrical release in the U.S. for our U.S. listeners, which there are many. I mean, we've talked, as rightfully so, the focus is on these the astronauts and cosmonauts of these programs, the NASA, European Space Agency, certainly Roscosmos. What is your feel? I mean, you've what is it like to be up there in space? What is? I mean, your film shows that brilliantly, but for our listeners, as they haven't had a chance to see the film, I mean, it's the usual questions. It's just you have to get on with the day-to-day of life while you're doing all these experiments and stuff. Is that, what is it like up there?
Well, I can only sort of comment on that secondhand, of course, because the astronauts say it better than me because they've been there. But from what I gather, first of all, they really, really want to be in space. I mean, someone like Peggy, who got the nickname Space Ninja, right. I mean, she loves it. She cannot, in fact, she reached her radiation levels, as she says at the end of my film, but she's going up again. She will be going up again with a private company. So she just loves it. And the idea that you can float through space, when you see Koichi Wakata, sort of poetically sort of doing little acrobatic somersaults, and he's playing baseball with himself, because he can catch the ball and everything. I think the floating side of it, they love. They're obviously, a lot of them very serious scientists and engineers who've got quite a strict regime of things they have to do in the day. I think it's called, Scott Kelly said it's called chasing the blue line. Mission control on the ground, they've got to do it, every single second is accounted for. They've got this, little rest time, exercise. And so, and I think when he came back after a year in space, he found it quite difficult just to have nothing to do. Because he kept thinking, but what am I to do for this next hour? I just sit on my sofa. So it's quite regimented, but within that, the thing they all talk about is that they love looking in the cupola and looking back on Earth. And because in the early days, I think I'm right in saying Expedition 1 with Bill Shepard and Yuri Gagarin, Yuri and Krikalev, they didn't have that observation window.
Oh,
so
interesting.
They didn't have that perspective on space.
I mean, there's that, again, I will talk more about it in a little bit, but the footage and everything is just absolutely amazing that we get and see, and what it must be like up there. I mean, as you've already said, one thing I think they stressed was how, we're used to seeing things on Earth with the air filtering things, and things are so much brighter and clearer when you're out of the atmosphere. And I think that is, again, it's almost, surreal is the wrong word, but it's almost, just that's something else I think they also mention.
They talk about the beauty. And the other thing that was quite important to me in the film is about sound, because, when I asked Tim Peake to describe what it was like to go on a spacewalk, and I said, describe it, viscerally. And he was saying, when you go into that air pressure lock, you can't hear anything. You could bang your helmet and you won't hear anything. And then when you go out, finally step out, which would be terrifying, I would think, you can hear the whir of your breathing equipment, but nothing else. And so that's why each story in the film is introduced by sound. So with Tim Peake, it's the sound of the ocean, where he grew up in West Sussex. With Samantha Cristoforetti, it's the sound of her boots on the snow, again, where she grew up. So, and Peggy, it's the sound of a little fly going over the crops. So because I want to show how important sound is, and also trying to show the beauty of the earth, really.
Well, you raised that, and there was a question I was going to ask you later, because it's obviously, it does come across that sound plays a very active role in telling this story, including what I found a very, very amazing soundtrack, actually. Does this go? I mean, you had I think you were a producer on a film about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that won an outstanding music Emmy. So is that something that you bring to your filmmaking, that you're very, I mean, sound we know is one of the three pillars of film, but is this something that's really important to you when you're making a movie?
It is actually. I mean, music is my passion, and somebody the other day said, "Oh, I always know it's one of your films because of the music," and I think if you can understand music, if you can feel music, you can feel emotion. And if you can feel emotion, you can get what I'm trying to do with the story. And I was very, very lucky. We worked with Ben Foster, this composer who's brilliant. And so we'd work together, and I'd sort of say, "Oh, I don't want this scene with Samantha to be like this," or blah, 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 and he would compose around it. And we took one of the piece of music I love was Tchaikovsky, Hymn to the Cherubim. That's the bit when Katie Coleman takes off in Russia with leaving her family. And it's this amazing sort of biblical, powerful piece of music. And we use that as the sort of theme, and we sort of, Ben sort of composed into that. And then on top of that, of course, I love having songs that are relevant to the people. Like I really felt Scott Kelly when he went up in the shuttle, he needed something sort of 70s hard hitting, like Mr. Blue Sky, ELO, and and also Nick Cave wrote this fantastic song called Bright Horses, which spoke to when Samantha said she saw the horses in the Russian plains with their manes on fire, and I just thought that would be brilliant. So there's songs in there, and also what you were saying about everyday things. The beginning of Ken Bowersox's story, he's actually, before he hears of the tragedy, he's actually hoovering up. They do Saturday to do their cleaning, and that makes me laugh to think that on Saturday everybody's doing their cleaning, even if you're in space.
Yeah.
And for that particular scene, we used Moon River when he was driving along, thinking about how he got into space. And then when they're doing the hoovering, the editor, who's fantastic, my editor, Reg Wrench, he knocked it back as if it was through a radio in space, Moon River.
Yeah.
But, so music is very important to me.
No, I think it's and what I liked about it was, sometimes music can just, some people are a bit bashful about music in a film, I think, and it's just sort of there in the background. But I think this is, it has those elements, but there's certainly, it's right there. It feels like another character in the film. But you just mentioned something about the families and stuff, and what is, I mean, if we talk a little bit more about the life and what this all means for those involved. I mean, you've already mentioned all the people that have to work together in order to make this happen, but what about the strains on the families? You have some interest, and you also have some great segments there about the families and the relationships and how this works, and some great, powerful women stories in here as well. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, if you don't mind.
Well, I think it's the same thing, as I said before, that to get an astronaut into space, there's a whole chain of people behind, whether it's people in NASA or Roscosmos. But there's also the families who allow them to go up there, really, because they support them. And in Katie Coleman's case, we had a chat, and I said, "Can I involve your family in this film?" And actually show from their perspective what it's like, with her husband, the glass blower, the artist Josh Simpson, and her son Jamie. And she said, well, nobody ever asked for that, so she was very happy to do that. And it's very interesting, when he speaks so eloquently about when she takes off, and you suddenly realize that flash of white light is actually someone you love. I mean, that's quite profound. But it's the same, with it's not just Katie having to say goodbye to her child. It's, Tim Peake saying goodbye to his children, or Scott Kelly saying goodbye to his family. It is a pressure on them, of course.
And they're gone for so long, some 6 months, sometimes up to a year in Scott's case, certainly. And I think, well, as you said, that bright light, but as I think it was either Scott or one of the other ones said, you're sitting on the equivalent of a bomb that goes off to get you into space. And I think, yeah. And then also, I mean, it also captures a lot of other things, like the difference in cultures, U.S. versus Russia, which was very interesting. And I have some experiences with Russia, so I do appreciate that. That was very typical, at least from my own experiences. So, and like you said, it's a very wide-ranging and amazing project. I mean, how much longer is it going to be going? Because I imagine these things have a life. Some of this equipment's now getting to be relatively dated, though I guess they can change it in and out if as need be.
I don't know technically exactly, because I think it was meant to have been, disassembled, as it were, about 2 years ago, but it's still going. Ever so often they have to just gravity brings it down, and they have to sort of push it up with just to keep it above the right level. But I mean, it can't go on indefinitely, but it seems to be working at the moment.
And well, last thing I will say on that is that what I discovered is you can get onto I think it's NASA. I just do a search for it, but you can, wherever you live in the world, can put your location, and you can find out how to see the space station fly overhead. So I know the times, at least where I live in England, when it's going to be visible, and we've got a clear day today, so I might be able to see it tonight. So I don't know if you've done that, Claire, but I highly recommend our listeners that find out where you live and put your location in and see when you might actually see the space station flying overhead. You can actually see it.
No, I think it's fantastic when you do work that out. And then in the film, one of the most moving scenes for me is Josh Simpson and his son Jamie just watching their wife, his wife and her mum fly over. So they used to go out and watch it fly over. They worked out where she'd be.
Well, and then the very, very poignant discussions and scenes about 9/11, which we've just obviously had the 20th anniversary, and hadn't realized they flew over Manhattan regularly over that day and caught a lot of the World Trade Centers collapsing and the plumes of smoke and debris and stuff. So it's all very very poignant. If you don't mind, if we talk a little bit about the film. I mean, so you've already mentioned how you got involved, but how did you? I mean, how was this a close collaboration with NASA and the different agencies involved? You get all these amazing astronauts and cosmonauts on camera, and some amazing footage that I take has to come from the agencies themselves.
I mean, I'd say to start with, we had to try. Our main aim was to, well, if I take it back from there, to make a film about the space station, for me, narratively was quite tricky because it's over a period of 20 years. It hasn't got that sort of linear, that easy narrative of, say, Apollo 11 or Apollo 13, just if people want to go up to the moon and come back or whatever. It's sort of 20 years, lots of different nationalities, lots of different people could be in the film. And I had to find a way of getting into that story, really, and picking certain people. And I have to say I struggled with it to start with because I couldn't see a way into the film. And then but going back to why it's called The Wonderful, I was reading the author Joseph Conrad talking about ancient sailors, when they go off in, they leave in ships, they don't know whether they're going to come back safely. And he said they were going to an inner beat, an impulse in the blood, to dream of the future. And they were wonderful. And it has to be said, they were ready for the wonderful. And I thought, this is the film, really. This is it. It's actually people that would do that. And so then I thought, I can't do this linear story. I'm going to have to do it as if they're little satellites that bump up against the space station. So you think these stories aren't connected. What on earth has 9/11 got to do with this? But then if you see, for instance, Expedition 1 was an obvious story to start with, because that's the sort of genesis of the space station.
Yes.
You see George Abbey stroking the arm of Bill Shepherd in the archive. And if you look in the archive, they are all linked. Scott Kelly's helping Samantha, or Tim Peake's being pushed out by Volkov, who we had earlier. So they are they do tie up, not in interviews, I didn't want that, but in archives. And so I think it was, going back to your original thing of collaboration, I sort of researched it and tried to find out the sort of people I wanted, and then we just had to go and ask them. And it worked in some cases better than others. Finally, we got all the people we wanted, actually. And NASA was, once we were on board with NASA, they let us have their archive, which is brilliant. And they've got some fantastic people working on the archive department. So we were very lucky with that. And Roscomos. And so we and JAXA and ESA, we had the support of all of them.
Yeah, I think it's amazing because, again, this, I haven't had the chance yet, but I definitely want to show this film to my sons and daughter, who are very interested in science and space and stuff. And I think it's, again, I think it's back to this, at least I have to say for myself and my own family and many I know, it's just one of these things that's happening above our head that we just never really think about. And yet it's quite amazing what they're doing and what they're achieving, and what is captured with the some of that footage almost looks like, can that really be real? Some of it, but it's absolutely amazing.
It is all real. I agree with you. You think, is that CGI?
I did think that a few times. I was like, no, I think that's actually.
But I didn't want any CGI in it, so there isn't. I did to make so it wasn't just archive and interviews. I also did some reconstruction scenes, sort of led into things like, the Russian boy looking in the young cosmonaut, as it were, looking in the mirror in his red jumper, and then he dreams of becoming a cosmonaut. And the same, with Peggy's situation as a young child being inspired by the moon landings. And we tried to do some, nice reconstruction, really, that would lead into the story.
Well, I think it works. I think it was as being of a certain age myself, I feel like you captured some of those childhood periods quite well, because as we mentioned, a lot of them were inspired. I'm not quite that can't remember at least the early Apollo missions, but certainly the 60s and 70s and what it was like, and would I imagine what it was like? I wouldn't know exactly what it was like for Russians or Soviets at the time, but no, I think it's very poignant. These dreams that people had. I think that Conrad quote is an excellent one. I think we should. I'm going to say we include that in the show notes, because I think that really is.
I'll send it to you, because it was, when I read it, I had like hairs on my arms, because I thought this is kind of the film, really. And it was the fact that it's people moving to an impulse in the blood, to a dream of the future. It's like they can't help but go out in those ships. And I feel that's the same with the astronauts. They just take it very seriously, their role in sort of space exploration and what they're doing.
And if you don't mind, let's, because I hate to say, I think we're coming up against our time right now with you. But just want to talk a little bit about your career. And are you? How long have you been doing documentary films? Or is that a loaded question to ask?
No. I'm like Zaza Gabor. I'm going to lie about my age. I didn't say that. But well, it's a funny when people talk about your career. It's just like it's tricky because I've never ever planned anything in my life. I've never had a plan or anything. I haven't even got a diary. I shouldn't say that to the producer because it drives them out, but I haven't actually got a diary. I have got a good memory, luckily. But I sort of got into filming, really. My father's a photographer. I grew up in a house that just loved films.
Yeah.
You know, not sort of fancy arty films, but just films. And I then went to university, and as part of my degree, I got a scholarship, or I should say, I could, you know, to go to an American university, but I had to pick something that I couldn't do in my university, so I chose film. And so I sort of studied film, but I was a bit I had the vision for films, but I was a bit shy. I did not like being the center of attention or anything, you know, because as a director, people look to you for decisions and things. So I sort of mooching about, and I worked for a film production company making commercials and things, and worked with a fantastic cameraman who was actually years later has done the sort of the Ali film and this one, and Kari Dubai actually, and this space film. And then I suddenly thought, oh, I want to make documentaries. And I knew my bank manager said, but there's no money in documentaries.
Exactly.
Why are you going from quite a good income to no income? And I said, because I just want to make stories about real people, really. And that's when I started. I went with, God knows what I was thinking, but I went up to the BBC with an idea for a series, having never made a documentary. And I remember wearing this absolutely ridiculous suit. I got panicked, and I had a suit I bought from Armani, a white trouser suit. And I looked like the little man in Fantasy Island. I mean, it was completely but anyway, a year later, they commissioned the series. And I started making documentaries about Che Guevara and Mick Jagger and Muhammad Ali and things. So about 20 years is your original question, wasn't it?
Well, I feel that was a rude question because I meant impolite question, at least. I shouldn't ask you how many years, but I wasn't sure because, or more of when you got into documentary, because I think it's, I mean, to be perfectly frank, if you go to IMDb, they don't necessarily show all your back catalog. So it's but what is interesting is in terms of the more recent stuff is so you've had this Ali film, you have this Kareem Abdul-Jabbar film, which were very sports American Muslim themed, I guess, even a bit, given both those individuals' backgrounds. So was this not to focus on that, but a very individual focused. But was this a bit of a departure for you to do something on something like the space station?
Well, I agree, because the film I made before the space station was about Primal Scream, the band. So I took them back. We went back to Memphis where they did some original recordings, and that was something for the BBC. So the space station was the first time anybody asked me to make a film about a thing, as it were, as opposed to people. But I somehow made it about the people. I reverted back to, well, you know, it's really about humanity. The space station, in a way, because there's so many fantastic films about the space station, the science and engineering. You know, there's one narrated by Tom Cruise, which is great and everything.
Yeah.
But this is really, the space station in a way is irrelevant. It's just using that as a foil to show the potential of man, I think.
Exactly, and I think that's what I think you have some quotes in there as well. You know, titles that basically, I mean, talks about what we can all achieve if we put our mind to it. Basically, not that we're all destined to be astronauts or cosmonauts. Far from it. I like you, I think would go crazy. I nearly fell off my chair when I saw those scenes of the spacewalks. I mean, that would just I would pass out, I think. But no, I thought that was very interesting and very poignant about like you said, the humanity of this, which raises a point. I mean, as you said, you took a gamble, you pitched a story to the BBC, and sort of the rest is history. What is the key to getting, not so much getting films, because you know, we got a lot of people who listen to this who are trying to get films commissioned. So it's not so much the key to getting films commissioned, but what is it that makes a film, you know, that makes the film, basically makes it not just interesting, but and I hate to use the word successful. That's not, because that's a bit convoluted. But I mean, what makes a good documentary in your mind?
Well, I mean, I don't even know if I make good documentaries. All I can say about what I do in my films, well, I didn't even know I did, but people feel quite emotional after them. I mean, I don't know whether that's because of the music or because of the way it's edited or because of the story. So I think what makes a good documentary is if you actually believe the people in it. And so when I interviewed the astronauts, because they think, oh my God, this woman knows so little about space or whatever, you know, they were quite relaxed. And you have a rapport with them and they trust you. And I have a duty of care in my own head to portray them in a truthful light. I'm not one of those sort of directors that would stitch someone up in that sense, just to get a more interesting angle or something.
Yeah.
I think you've got to feel it's truthful. That's the key. I watch documentaries that the best ones for me is when you really sort of, somebody talking in the interviews really touches a nerve with you, whatever the subject.
Yeah. And with that in mind, what's next for you?
Was he?
and most people, I'll cut in there because most filmmakers just immediately say, well, I'm not allowed to say, or I'm not at liberty. But
no, I'm not at liberty to say, but actually what I'd like more than anything is to have like a week off or something. No, I always have ideas in my head, making myself sound like Joan of Arc. But no, I always have sort of film ideas in my head, and I there is something I am going to be working on, but I am not at liberty to say.
Well, we will be on the lookout for it regardless. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It was a joy meeting you and to talk about this great film that you've made that I highly recommend, The Wonderful Stories from the Space Station, which was released earlier this month on most digital platforms here in September 2021. So, Claire, thank you again. And if I haven't scared you off with all our technical glitches and things, we'd love to have you again on the podcast when your next project's out.
Well, thank you very much for your support and for your listeners. And I will promise I will play to my strengths and make a film I know nothing about. Like, I knew nothing about boxing. I knew nothing about, I mean, now I could go on a quiz show about space.
Well, maybe we'll be on the lookout for that as well. And really did enjoy the film. And
best in the cinema, though. It really is.
It will. Well, I'm going to try to get it up I watched it on a laptop, unfortunately.
Because it's designed for the cinema, so it's got the sound. It has to be in a big theater, really.
We don't have a home entertainment system like some people do, certainly like a lot of my compatriots, but we do. I am going to get it on a bigger screen so my children can watch it, because it definitely needs to be in HD and all that. But no, I thought, I probably should have mentioned even, I think one thing that struck me is that I felt like I was watching a feature narrative in many ways. I mean, I know there's, it was just the sort of as you said, it's probably that quality of the aimed at the big screen.
I always sort of like to punch above my weight, as it were. And I've got this fantastic cinematographer, Stuart Luck. So he, we approach each scene as if we're making a movie, really, rather than a documentary.
Well, I think it comes across loud and clear. So thanks again.
All right, thanks. Take care. Bye now.
Also want to give a big shout out to Sam and Joe at Intersound Audio in Eskrick, England, just outside of York. A big thanks to Nevena Paunovic, our podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting such great guests like Claire onto the show. Finally, a big thanks to our listeners. As always, we love to hear from you, so please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. And please remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off.
You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.